Welcome to your Friday. This is your pod / vlog / stream / bowling alley, but I don't know, whatever there. For the 15th of May, it's good to have you, however you found us, watching us live on Facebook for our Fancy Friday, or if you are tuning into the podcast, which you might have downloaded off iTunes or God help me out here, Piers, everything.
Spotify,
Spreaker.
Podcast Addict,
Spotify.
anything that you're listening on, we will have it on there.
That's right. So it's 15th of May. It's a great date. You know why, hey? You know why?
No, of course.
Because it's that cool day for Gunners fans. This is their day. 2004. On this day, they became the first team to go through an entire English Premier League season without losing.
Damn.
How about that? Huh?
How about that?
Unbeaten. They were unbeaten. I should say. There you go. What's been happening in your world today, Pierre? There was some rock your world today with news?
Yes. Yes. I would like to do an official welcome to the Huskies. We are Auckland Huskies. Auckland Huskies. I was going to bring up the graphic, but it kept screwing up. But there's never enough Huskies in your life. There we go. You can kind of see it. Wait.
We are Auckland, the Auckland Huskies. Do you like that? They were the former Hobart Huskies, weren't they?
Yes.
Of the New Zealand. So this was weird, right? They were the Hobart Huskies, but were they the ones in the New Zealand Basketball League? So they were flying backwards and forwards and doing things like playing Southland. But this is like now they're going to be the Henderson Huskies?
Well, they're going to be based in New Zealand now, and I think it's because there was some ruling passed that they weren't allowed to be playing in the New Zealand Basketball League, so they went, we've got a choice here. We either stay playing Australian League or we jump over and we join the New Zealand League full-time, and so they've taken that option, and they'll be based in Auckland. And man, I was trying to think of the things that really do, you do need in the logos set up in a league. And Huskies I like Huskies. I like the breed of dog. I like what they stand for. Like there's no such thing. You should not have a Husky if you're a terrible owner. B, you don't take it out for a walk like every single second.
They love to walk.
And they eat a ton. Like that is a basketball player of ever. Yeah, that is a basketball player if ever I've known one. And the Huskies, the Auckland Huskies, welcome.
Have they bought jerseys out yet? Jerseys? Any jerseys?
I cannot confirm nor deny, but I may have been talking with the person who will be making their jerseys. And there is a good possibility too that on this very show we will be giving you some of the first Huskies merchandise.
Oh, I love the merch.
Wow.
Love the merch.
Doing deals, mate. Well, you are in the hornet's nest getting us all that top news. I'm behind the scenes.
I see how my reporter stuff and know people that's rubbed off on you, and you're really working well. Getting us some free merch and stuff. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, this actually is free merch for people who are watching right now.
Oh, shit.
We will be giving it away. We're not those guys.
I thought you meant us. Okay, I'm less excited, but I'm still
all for you people. Hey, it's for the people.
It's for the people, man.
Okay, hang on, wait a minute. I'll just get the Tamworth Today music. When it
that music at the start, couldn't they? Yeah, I loved it.
What's going on in Tamworth?
Come on.
I played a bit of soccer today, and guess what? I told Mark I wouldn't be doing myself justice if I didn't class some of my touches Maradona-like.
Really? Soft feet?
Soft feet, one touches, over the head, back heel kick.
Any injuries? Any Warriors who are limping off the field?
No, it wasn't the boys, it was the staff. So,
Who's got good touch out of the staff members?
Stacey Jones, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Good at everything. Good at everything. But I don't want to be that person that just keeps bashing the NRL. Like, I don't want to be the person, but Super Rugby's brought out their thing for the 9 games or whatever. NRL brought out a draw today. Don't know if anyone's seen it.
Yes.
They brought 2 games out. So, where's the other 18? And also, with the 2 games, to make it even more embarrassing, they've got games. So the Broncos are playing the Eels, or the Broncos are playing someone in Brisbane somewhere. That's what it said. So not Suncorp Stadium, in Brisbane somewhere.
Why are they being dodged?
That's why I don't want to be a dick to. I love NRL. I don't want to be the dick. But mate, who's fucking running the show?
Hey, Blake. Trust me when I say it's fine. You're allowed to look at it, but you want them to be the champions, right? You gave your life, your blood, sweat, your tears. You gave it to this organisation, and look at them give it back to you. Like they just can't quite get it right.
they're good at being in the news every day, though. They certainly are.
Yeah.
We're doing this now, we're not about doing this.
Yeah.
And then there's all sorts of jabs and not jabs. And now I'm a bit sick and now I wasn't and what have you. But yeah, you're right. I mean, like draw-wise, netball's already got their one sorted for Auckland. So that's pretty cool. They're doing that one as well. And I see, unfortunately, the top 4 of rugby's not on this year for the first 15. So we're just going to keep it regional. So Hastings boys, obviously, defending champs, we carry over.
Yeah.
So how about that?
Oh, nice.
How about that?
You like that? Kings will have to wait another year.
Akina. There you go.
Hey, hey guys, let's kick into this early because unbeknownst to you, we're going to make it look live, even though there's going to be sunshine coming through the curtains when we talk to her. And Blake's
I'm excited about
automatically
tonight's
disappear.
show.
Yes,
I really am excited about. I think that on these Fridays we've been trying really hard to educate people, and so look, this is you might have seen if you saw the thing about it. Don't worry, this isn't a party political broadcast. This is actually us going, what's it all about? Okay, so this is the what's it all about, isn't it? It was pretty cool yesterday.
Yes, I find that politicians use large words that I scratch my head going and then it probably takes 3 large word combos, very similar to when you're playing Street Fighter, a 3 large word combo that makes me just put down the control pad and walk away and say politics aren't for me. We had a chat with Chloe Swarbrick from the Greens Party, and she is it Greens or Green Party? I don't know, but hey,
Green. We say Greens. Yeah, everyone knows who you mean.
Yeah. And she is an amazing young lady. And by the end of it, I think when I was just watching back, so I got the end bit right. I'm just a blubbering mess. I'm like, thank you so much for helping me.
You are really good.
You're really good. Just quickly too, before we head into that interview, I want to make sure we get through the weather chat. Got to have weather chat. Sturdy weather chat at this time of the year. Aiden says, evening fellas, 9 degrees in Puketitiri. Is that right?
It's in Puketitiri.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's this evening. So the fire is on to take the edge off. Nice fireplace.
Ooh,
fireplace
nice fire.
Yeah. We got Shane Clarkson says it's as cold as a mother-in-law in the far north too. Ivan says heading for an overnight low of 6 in Cambridge tonight, gents. Currently coolish 9 degrees. Thank you, Ivan. Always appreciate the weather update. Will Miller says great in the south. Ross Henry says been listening on Spotify in the mornings. Thought I'd give it a go live. What's the weather? He says when's the weather chat happening? What about?
I reckon. This weather thing. I think it's got legs. I reckon news programs want to start doing weather too. Just quietly.
8 in Melbourne at the moment. Thanks, Roger. Thanks for the. We've got to be doing this. We've got to be doing.
So you
this.
Gave me a task last night. You said there's unusual sport. So I've looked at a Wikipedia and there's no sport on there. So I didn't.
Just wait. Rewind it back a bit and say what we were talking about with the unusual sport.
So you guys said that Chloe was a exceptional player at a sport.
Yeah, she was a player of a sport or a doer of a sport that you'd be like, wow, really? You would not pick. You would not pick.
So I've had put my thinking cap on. So this could hurt. She's part of the Greens.
Yes.
And I went total opposite. Like she was doing something before she turned there. So I went lumberjack.
Lumberjack?
Yeah, I don't know. So, but then I read on the Wikipedia that I don't know if I'm giving anything away that she's lived in certain places.
Yeah.
So I don't know if she said that.
So did you think lumberjack?
Wood chopping. Yeah,
I thought lumberjack.
Like wood chopping.
Yeah.
So did you go lumberjack and then Wikipedia, or did you go Wikipedia?
I went lumberjack. Then Wikipedia.
Okay, so don't say anything more because I'd say
I didn't see the sport.
Yeah.
Okay, I won't say where she lived.
Yeah,
but
because I reckon part of the places she lives is a bit of a dead giveaway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I went lumberjack.
So you went lumberjack.
That was your first guess.
Was Chloe Swarbrick, our Green MP, a lumberjack? We'll find out now while Nathan and I chatted to her live, kind of nowish.
Yes. Okay, so look, there's the election this year, and as well as voting in the general election, we might have referendums to vote on and other sorts of things. So we go live into Parliament right now. This is totally live at 8:30 at night. Don't just ignore the light behind Chloe Swarbrick. It's a special effect. It's Wellington. That's where Weta is. That's where those sorts of things happen. But Chloe Swarbrick's with us right now. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Kia ora. Thank you for having me.
Chloe, now you, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we tend to stick to our lines and stick to our zones and go into sports. So I like the way that we're gonna branch out on a Friday and have you in there, because I don't know about your sporting pedigree, but I certainly know about your politics, because you're very active on Twitter, and that's where I consume. That's the only place I ever get any politics consumed. So I enjoy that part of it. I feel like I'm brainy because you've tweeted something out and I go and read it.
I'm happy to be feeding that in for you, bro. But yeah, my sporting background is not very illustrious. I do have a background in martial arts. I did karate for about 7 years and Muay Thai for about 2 years. So after I came into Parliament, I could no longer keep up with classes or anything like that because you end up between Auckland and Wellington at the time. So instead, I'm just on the weights. I'm actually stoked because today it's budget day. You know, we're broadcasting into the future here on Friday, but it is presently Thursday with our pre-record. And it's budget day here, but it's also the first day of Alert Level 2, which means that the gyms reopen, which was the thing that I, amongst our office, was definitely the most excited about, getting back to the weights, honestly.
That's cool.
Why does it, is it like an adrenaline release for you, or what is it? Is it just the feeling of an extra amount of freedom? Like, what's the bit you're most looking for?
So, I mean, I think for me, the thing that I've consistently been looking forward to as we've been scaling down the alert levels and kind of having a little bit more freedom as, you know, public health measures are kind of undertaken, I have always been looking forward to more freedom with regard to exercise. So I've been running during the lockdown and, you know, I took up running to do a half marathon last year. And I'll just be completely honest with you, I hate running. But I know that it's like it's a good exercise, cardio is important and stuff, but I much prefer kind of HIIT workouts. And after doing kind of active exercise through martial arts and MMA for a while, I found that kind of the straightforward kind of, for lack of a better term, just dumbness of picking heavy stuff up and putting it down again in terms of weightlifting was just really cathartic and quite meditative. So that's what I'm looking forward to in level 2. I'll be back in the gym picking stuff up and putting it down. It's a nice time to put your phone in the locker and just not think about that politics stuff, you know? Totally.
Hey, Chloe, this part of the treat of actually following you on Twitter is the idea that you are very vocal in what is going to be a marijuana, is it referendum? I don't know my words well, but and this is something that you're passionate about. And from the looks on Twitter, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's like here's this young, vivacious person who sees something that I agree with, and she's putting it out there, and I'm like, and then I'll read through the comments, and there's a whole lot of dusty people who seem to get on it and be like really kind of, no, and it confuses me. So can you simple it down and not use too many massive words and tell me what it is that you are trying to achieve and why, and then how I can help, please?
Hard out. So as you kind of mentioned at the top, when folks go to the voting ballot this election in September 19th, they won't just be voting for the party and they won't just be voting for their general kind of electorate candidate. They'll also get to vote on 2 different referendums. Speaking to referenda or referendums, amongst all of the nerds who are pedantic in Parliament, there was a real debate around the grammar as to whether we went for referenda or referendums, but we've settled on 2 referendums. Okay. One of them is on end-of-life choice with regard to kind of euthanasia. Mm-hmm. The other is on cannabis legalization and control. So that's the one that I'm responsible for and have been negotiating for the past 2.5 years with the Minister of Justice, Andrew Little, as well as across the House with the likes of Paula Bennett and Mark Mitchell from the National Party. So in a nutshell, basically why I am such a big advocate for cannabis law reform is because I think everybody in this country fundamentally agrees that substances, whether they are alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, or otherwise, can cause harm. So if you agree at a baseline that cannabis can cause harm, the next question becomes, how do you want to reduce that harm? And right now we have a system that effectively pushes people who use cannabis, which is 11% of the New Zealand population on an annual basis, by the way, nearly 500,000 New Zealanders, into the shadows where they have no control over the quality, over the potency. Drug dealers don't check ID, so we have no controls in terms of kids accessing this stuff. And basically, I'm just saying that we need to take that out of the shadows, put it into the light, put some frameworks around it. And in that respect, you have the opportunity to let adults be adults. Most people are completely okay with most adults just not being charged criminally for doing this. But I think a lot of people also forget that right now, it is criminally enforced disproportionately, in particularly low-income and Māori communities. So we still have 4,000 low-level cannabis convictions per year. Convictions don't mean people are necessarily going to jail, but they do mean something on someone's permanent record, which is an impediment to you having job opportunities, education opportunities, and obviously in terms of travel as well. So if we think about just the disproportionate way that cannabis laws are enforced in this country, that alone should be enough for most people to go, we need to get more common sense around this. So the folks who are jumping on it, as you were saying, Mark, kind of seem to think that I'm talking about inventing cannabis. You know, like, I'm sorry, guys, I'm not God. I haven't invented it. The cat's out the bag. You know, what we're actually talking about here is the best approach to mitigate harm and particularly to limit access to kids and to enable people to make educated adult decisions about what is best for them and for their family. And if that is the outcome that you want, then you create a legal framework around it, place duties of care on the people who are selling it, you regulate, you create forms of taxation that invest in education and in harm reduction.
Geez, so Chloe, you must be passionate at all shit, because that is a lot of work to do to do it, like to get it in. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of be honest with you. You kind of lost me after you got to the point where you said 11% of New Zealanders are using it in the shadows. And I thought to myself straight away, well, that's 11 honest percentage of, because I know many people that, and it is so easily accessible. And it was when I was in high school, and it is now. And I know you've got to go back doors to get it, but it's so easy to get. It seems ridiculous to me as a simple man, with simple pleasures, with a family, that it seems like ridiculous that people think that it's not already out there, it's not already, you know, amongst us. So why wouldn't you do something right with it?
I think that for a lot of people, because of the way that it is currently treated, as you say, like kind of backdoor in the shadows, people can get it if they want it. You know, I had this yarn with Duncan Garner on the AM show about a year or two ago, where he was like, why do you want to unleash this? And I'm like, bro, I'm not talking about throwing this from the rooftops. I'm actually talking, if anything, about setting down some regulations to go, hey, if you're selling to kids, you're going to be shut down. And there are going to be rules and regulations on the suppliers. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, the next argument that often comes up is people going, oh, well, what about alcohol? The thing is, alcohol isn't regulated as well as it could be, but if you compare alcohol in its legal regulated form to where we were at under the guise of potential prohibition in the early 1900s, and follow the United States example, when alcohol was prohibited, you didn't get rid of alcohol. Instead, you placed it in the hands of gangs who continued to increase potency. There was violence, there was turf wars, there were further criminality associated. So instead, the US was like, this clearly isn't working. We're going to put this in a regulated model again. And we have the opportunity to do that with cannabis. So why wouldn't we just be straight up, recognize that this is happening and put some control around it? You guys seem to get it, but there's a lot of folks who don't.
Yeah, I want to be able to hear something or say something, because there will be people who are watching the stream who don't agree with it or are scared of the idea of having it legalized. I want you to be able to have said something, and you are, although you lost me again with gangs. As soon as you get to key words, I stop and I go, but you to say something that makes you then go, okay, cool. But for me, like I just said before, it's so easy to get your hands on. Like, it doesn't take long to get it anyway. So why wouldn't there be some type of framework in place? And if it's easy for me, it's easy for someone younger than me. It's easy for someone older than me. I get that. How to get that message across to the people who don't is crazy. Sorry, Nate.
Chloe, do you envisage? Let's just say this goes through and works, right? I as I understand it, and you'll be able to correct me here, I think the Canadians do a thing where, like, they sell, and everything is it has to be, I think it's like a government owned kind of deal, in like a similar way that in West Auckland, out where I live, you know what I mean, like you can't buy alcohol at the supermarket, right? It's like a trust thing. Is that I think that's the way it works. Ed, would you think that you know, in your mind, that it works like that in New Zealand, so it's controlled that way? Or is it like perhaps the Dutch model where people can get a license to say, I would like to sell and this is what I would like to do?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because there's a number of different frameworks that we can kind of look at overseas. One of them is actually Uruguay as well. Uruguay was one of the first countries in the world to legalize, behind different states in the US. There are tons of different models that go from Uruguay, which is completely kind of government locked down, over there are 3 different ways that you can get licenses to engage in the cannabis market. One of them is to get a license to grow. One of them is to get a license to purchase from a government agency. And one of them, which is like a pharmacy, one of them is to get a license to join what is effectively a cannabis club. And if you get one of those 3 licenses, you can't get a license in another area. So it's quite kind of restricted and stringent. And the argument with a really locked down version of kind of a government model is that actually you continue to enable the black market to flourish because there isn't enough leniency for people to just actually want to access cannabis and they're going to be adults about it. So you need to strike that right balance. Then in the US and places like Colorado, they have definitely gone way more down the kind of commercial free market route where there is advertising. There is essentially like the Uber Eats of cannabis, and they are just going gangbusters with what they're calling the green rush over there. So we don't quite want to go there either. Canada has a pretty decent model in that they have gone primarily for a public health-based approach. The starting point is cannabis exists, how do we best regulate it and disempower the black market so that people are purchasing what they kind of have quality control and consumer protections over, that there's high quality education to people so that they know, for example, about the impacts with regard to impairment, so that they don't do silly things like driving under the influence, they don't do silly things like going to work under the influence, and also to educate employers and to educate police around the differences with something staying in your system versus actual impairment, right? So in New Zealand, we are actually kind of taking the best kind of parts of all of the different models that have been showcased across the world. But we're also taking the best bits of tobacco regulation and the best bits of alcohol regulation, and funnily enough, the best bits of food regulation. So MPI, the Ministry of Primary Industries, has been somewhat involved in how we best do that. Because you need to make sure that stuff isn't tampered with, you need to make sure that it meets high quality health and safety standards. So in New Zealand, the kind of experience of Kiwis, if we do get this through on September 19th and we do start to develop the model based on the Cannabis Legalisation and Control Bill, which is available for the general public to access if you go to referendums.govt.nz, it's got it all explained in simplified kind of language, which I think is really important because oftentimes the jargon that is used to kind of explain law to people means that stuff gets way more confusing than it needs to be and you don't know how it's practically going to work. But as a New Zealander, there is going to be no advertising. So publicly, you're not going to see billboards. There won't be kind of stuff flashing up. There won't be influencer marketing. So there won't be people kind of marketing it as they aren't allowed to do with tobacco. So you won't see that on your kids' phones or anything like that. It'll just be that there are stores with very low-key storefronts. You go in there, if you are over the age of 20, you'll be ID checked, and then you will be able to have an adult conversation around what you are looking for, and you'll be able to purchase a limited amount. So the maximum amount that anybody can purchase per day is 14 grams. The reason for that is that we have said that we are not allowing online shopping, for example. So people in regions are going to need to be able to stock up if they're only able to access their shops every other month or so. And then you are going to receive your product in a relatively non-branded kind of package, which is going to have health and safety warnings the same as you have on tobacco. So it's basically just a high quality experience that educates people about the transaction that they're going through, the product that they are purchasing, and then they get to make educated adult decisions about how they consume that.
That's amazing.
Do you think that people will do the whole, when it comes to them, despite the fact that, you've got information, all that sort of stuff, there's still going to be people that look at it on the day. This is my worry. They go, oh, do I want this to be legal? Oh, and then they think it's a quiz. No, this is illegal, and they'll tick that, the whole, I can't vote to make this legal because it's illegal. Like, what about changing a mind like that?
Yeah, that is the real hard one, eh? Like, I was actually chatting to some students on, because during normal times, I do potlucks with a bunch of different young people around the country when I'm traveling about, just to actually keep my feet on the ground, some skin in the game, and to have people quiz me, critique me, whatever, so that I know what's up with folks and don't end up so disconnected in this weird institution that is Parliament. And these young people were talking about, you know, kind of how they've grown up and been told by their parents and by their kind of health education in school. It's the equivalent of the kind of Mean Girls line, you know, if you use cannabis, you will get pregnant and you will die. Like, it's the top kind of, you know, war on drugs rhetoric that everything is going to collapse in, the sky's going to fall in if we legalize cannabis. That's why it's been really important to communicate to people that actually cannabis exists. We are not having a debate about whether cannabis exists. That's why we've called it the Cannabis Legalization and Control Bill. Because I think a lot of people see the word legalization, and this is the other kind of quite complicated dialogue that I've got involved in with a bunch of people who go, I understand that people shouldn't be criminalized for cannabis, so I'm all for decriminalization, but I don't know about legalization. So the difference between decriminalization and legalization, decrim is literally just about removing criminal penalties from the people who use the substance. Ironically, if you remove criminal penalties from the people who use the substance, you actually create a perverse incentive for people to continue going to the black market to consume more of the substance because they know they're not going to get arrested. But the problem is that you still have illicit supply chains that aren't regulated in terms of quality, in terms of potency, in terms of consumer protections. There's still no education and there's still no greater funding for public health if it is required. And there's still no regulations around the age of access or anything like that. Right. So what legal regulation does is basically puts rules in place on the supply side, which is really critical if you want to reduce harm, but also you want to provide information to potential consumers. Because as Mark was kind of saying before, right, whether you're 15 or 50, if you want to get your hands on cannabis in New Zealand, you can do it tomorrow. But you have no idea what you're getting. You have no idea what it might potentially be laced with. You have no idea where your money is going in terms of what it ends up further kind of resourcing, whether it is other underground activity or otherwise. Surely we, as you know, educated adults, want to be able to engage in a regulated market here, because the market is going to exist. Right now, it's just a black market.
Can I just ask, that the way it's written on the form that we tick, why isn't it more along the lines then of, are you all for putting some framework around marijuana, rather than using the words legalization and all the shit that scares people, especially older people who sit there and go, oh no, how can it not be just written in a way? Did you get to choose how it's written, or is that
to be totally honest with you, bro, it's politics.
Yeah.
Right.
So I had to negotiate this through with all of these different parties that were actively engaged in it. And the other thing, which I think kind of prompts a lot of fear in people's minds, is the notion of recreational cannabis.
Yeah.
So people are like, oh, cannabis, but recreational cannabis is evil. And it's like, it's actually the same kind of thing. And also, even if we're talking about medicinal cannabis, the properties of recreational medicinal cannabis are relatively similar. CBD and THC, most people know as the two major compounds that exist within cannabis. And people go, oh, CBD is the therapeutic one, THC is the one that get you high. But what we're finding with more and more research, which has been allowed to start being undertaken as a result of the easing of this kind of war on drugs rhetoric and framework, particularly in the US and Canada, has been greater discovery of the importance of the interaction between THC and CBD. But also we have all of this weird kind of mentality towards cannabis, particularly medicinal cannabis, when people go, oh, we can't let it get people high. Sorry, what about opioids? What about, you know, when you go into hospital and you receive laughing gas? What about all of the other things, morphine, that we give people that have a raft of side effects that offer them?
They're legal, Chloe. They're legal. And that's the difference.
They're legal, though.
Yeah, but this is the thing. It's simply a matter of having a critical mind and asking yourself, how do we create the best framework to, sure, reduce harm, but also enable people to have a better framework around what's already happening? Because we have tried, guys, one of the craziest things when I started delving deeper and deeper into this, because I knew nothing about drug law reform 2.5 years ago. I've just fallen down a rabbit hole because as you realize, you know, nobody wants to touch this with a barge pole, particularly politicians, because it's so complicated. And on top of that, there's so much kind of mythology and fear-mongering and all of that stuff. And it's funny, you know, I had someone talking about Twitter, about 2 years ago, tweeting, you know, maybe the reason that no politicians want to get involved in the cannabis debate is because they'll end up like depicted in the Herald in a cartoon wearing like a Rasta hat with a big bomb.
Yep.
And I've had that happen to me. I thought it was a joke, but I have literally had that happen to me. Actually, in my office, I've got a framed photo of my first ever cartoon in the Herald with me smoking a giant bomb, which is ridiculous because I don't touch cannabis. Like, I think that's one of the biggest misnomers, is I'm not actually a fan of cannabis. It doesn't care what I think. I don't care what I think about cannabis, and I don't think that should matter. What matters is how we create the most safe framework for New Zealanders. And to the point around 500,000 Kiwis using cannabis every year, 80% of New Zealanders will use cannabis by the time they are 21 years old. That is data from the University of Otago. And that means, if you think back to shows like Backbenchers, where politicians are asked, you know, every few months, when was the last time you smoked cannabis? Most politicians will be, oh, you know, back in the midst of time, back when I was at uni. But the fact of the matter is, you have most politicians now who are on record as saying they have used cannabis in the past. And what that means, and you can't say hypocrite in the House, in Parliament, but you have a number of politicians, the majority of politicians, who have admitted to using a substance that they now oversee the rules of, which penalise people for doing exactly the same thing they did. For potentially giving people criminal records for doing exactly the same thing they did, when they sit over all of these laws, these frameworks. And we've just got so much hypocrisy with the way that we approach drug legislation in this country.
I think, Chloe, like when it talks about, you know, that all those things you were saying, when people go, oh, but what about recreational, or what about this? I think they think of this is going to be out there, and it's just going to be all those unemployed solo mums with 9 kids in Huntley. They're just going to be bunging it into their face, and that's all they're doing. And part of me kind of thinks, you know, like, so would you want your let's go star nephew that everyone just thinks is amazing, who went to a very well thought of school, goes down to Otago and is smoking a joint at a party or something, right? Do you think he should have a criminal record? And sometimes I think for them that would hit home quite hard that way, because I think they think, no, that belongs down with the lower class that I don't have anything to do with, and that's why they are lower and not us.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the great irony with it, right? Is that actually, if you look at data about demographics, that's kind of groups of people, whether it's ethnicity, age, or otherwise. Funnily enough, if you look at places that have legalized, Canada has shown that the only demographic who has increased their usage as a result of legalization is those over the age of 65. So that could be potentially because those demographics don't know where to access it when it's illegal, or prefer not to go to a tinny house. I don't know. But funnily enough, those between the age of 15 and 17, their use has massively decreased, and cannabis researchers in Canada have put that down to a decrease in accessibility. But also it completely flies in the face of the argument, particularly by the no camp, that we're somehow going to glamorize and normalize cannabis. In fact, what you do when you put cannabis in a regulated model is that you make it much more like tobacco, which is something that kids nowadays don't see as cool or hip or fun.
No.
In fact, it's something which is regulated, something which we talk realistically about the harms of. And this is the funny thing. I get a lot of people going, we're trying to be smoke-free 2025. Why are you introducing this new thing? Again, I'm not introducing it. It exists. And the 11% of users in New Zealand using cannabis per year has remained stagnant for decades. The way that we have reduced consumption of tobacco in this country is through legal regulation and control. If you were to leave that entirely to the black market, there would be no education, no opportunity to use the levers of taxation or limits on where you can purchase or advertising or anything like that. So again, if you want to look at the example of tobacco and say, hey, look, we're trying to reduce tobacco usage, that is a great example for how we should be approaching cannabis, actually, because it's about regulation and the power of regulation.
Dan, that's Chloe, you've got me. So let me
just make sense.
Before it makes so much sense. Before we move, because we would like to talk just a little bit about you, and I know it's budget day, so we cannot take up too much time. First of all, so there will be a form that we are, as New Zealanders, going to go and tick to say who we want running the country, and then there'll also be a box that says whether we would like, and I want to put it in my words, And that was something I wanted to say as well. There's too many weird words like recreation. I haven't used the word recreation ever. Like I never use it. Like
who's saying recreational whiskey? You know?
Yeah, I know. It's like just do you want to join? Anyway,
is this recreational wine?
So we can tick a box to say, yep, we're happy for the government to start regulating the use of marijuana and making sure that it's going in the right places, and with that, hopefully everything will be made better. So thank you so much for simplifying it for me. I just quickly too, my experience with marijuana as a child was my parents said no. And the day I came home from, I won't say his full name, Damien's house, and I had done a bucket and my eyes were bloodshot, and my mum said, you've done marijuana, and it was like the worst thing ever. But then my good mate had parents who would use it at the end of the day. So it'd be like most people would grab a red wine and relax. They'd have a quick joint, and we knew it was happening, and it was so peaceful and sweetly used and responsibly done that I went from a household that was like no to and so I did the math on that and worked out that while it's there, it's readily available. Why aren't more people able to do it?
On that thing around the kind of stuff that we teach kids, right? It's really important to recognize that when you teach kids that, you know, this is evil, the sky's going to fall in, and then kids see their friends using it, because we know that most New Zealanders will first be exposed to cannabis when they are teenagers at high school. And they end up going out after school or in the weekends or whatever, and someone's using it and the sky isn't falling in. And then they end up trying it. And then they go, hey, this isn't evil. The sky isn't going to fall in. Actually, what that does is exposes the lies that adults have been telling kids, and actually manifests the opportunity for kids and teenagers to engage in more risky behavior. And that's actually reflected in research out of the US with regards to the efficacy, that being the effectiveness of the DARE program. When you basically tell kids, don't touch it, it's awful, you'll die, blah, 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 and then they engage with it and realize that's not the case, they go, hey, what else are adults lying about? Maybe I'll try something else. So instead, being realistic, straight up and honest about it, it's really similar to the conversation that we were having 30, 40 years ago, actually even 10 years ago, with regard to sex education. You know, if you are solely teaching abstinence, it means that kids who do decide to do something that's risky, as we were talking about before, you know, they are more likely to have a teen pregnancy or to have something else go wrong. Whereas if you teach safety from a public health realistic perspective, then people who do things do it safer, and other people understand why they shouldn't, but not because they think that the world is going to end if they do engage in it, but because they understand the adult evidence-based ramifications or outcomes of that action.
Yeah, well, Chloe, I can tell you this much for free. The sky certainly fell down on Damien when I came home after that night, and that came from my mother. But no, for you personally, I mean, you seem so switched on. You
workplace.
So well.
Yeah, I sit back there.
That's your workplace, I mean,
Mr. Speaker, standing up. You don't seem like a politician. How did you end up with that? Were you particularly good at scrapping with words at school, and how did you end up getting into
I'm
it?
actually a high school dropout, so
really?
yeah, no, I came from a pretty I don't know, like, for me, school was a weird place where I was definitely a nerd. I was interested in ideas, but I used to get in scraps, actually. I was once kicked out of my chemistry class for arguing with my teacher, because I had read a book about the philosophy of science and was like, hey, everything you're teaching us is falsifiable, which is technically true, but she didn't want to engage with me on the theory of science.
Don't do that.
What a nightmare student.
Yeah, I know. So I ended up dropping out, leaving home, and I had the good fortune because, you know, I do work quite hard. So I got into uni with what's called discretionary entrance, which is an alternative pathway. So I started there, originally started with a degree in philosophy and psychology. I have something called dyscalculia, which is like dyslexia, but with maths. And when I realized undergrad psych was basically all maths, I just couldn't hack it. So it's important to learn your strengths.
Yeah.
So that is when I kept going through philosophy and picked up law, because I thought that that would be a really interesting kind of application of, in philosophy, I'm going, hey, what kind of society do we want to live in? And in law, it's like, this is how we build that society. There's the foundations or the structures for it. So that was kind of my ethical basis, and I was just learning because I loved the ideas. While I was there, I started working at BFM. I was there for about 4.5 years. I also started working at Neck of the Woods, which is a venue on K Road. And I got involved with a bunch of mates of mine who are artists who were basically being told by their parents that they couldn't do that as a career, so were being forced into doing stuff that they hated. And I had absolutely no business experience, but was just like, hey, look, I'm not an artist, but I can organize stuff. So I'll try and figure out how to put on art exhibitions, do pop-up shops, galleries, all that kind of stuff. So we did a bunch of different pop-ups and things that later manifest into me and my former partner, Alex, who I'm still really good mates with, and our friend Brian, opening a little art gallery, coffee and donut shop in Mount Eden, which we ran for about a year. So I've had all of these kind of hodgepodge of experiences, but everything kind of hit the fan for me in 2016 when I was just about to finish at BFM, but I was interviewing all of the candidates who were putting themselves forward to be the mayor of Auckland. And all they wanted to talk about was rates. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, that's an important thing. Obviously, people's finances are important. But why are people paying their rates? Like, what's the point of Auckland Council? What's the vision for the city? You know, Auckland, Tamaki Makaurau is the fastest growing city in the country, and it's one of the most diverse cities in the world. What's our identity? What do we stand for? Who are we? What do we want to do with all of this? Because we're growing, we've got to have a plan. And none of them really wanted to talk about that. Like, none of them wanted to get into the weeds and go, hey, this is what we can be if we work together. And this is the kind of stuff that I think, you know, think big projects that will define us. You know, I find it hilarious that Auckland, our symbol is this hypodermic needle, the Sky Tower. Like, we can, you know, we can have other stuff going for us, and we do. And so much of that amazing innovation and entrepreneurship and creativity is underground. We need to find out how to elevate and celebrate it. So I was just real frustrated, as I'd been for kind of years and years, and was talking to my producer, Lillian Hanley, also with the small business stuff, because I felt like I was kind of tinkering around the edges and trying to create spaces and places for people that government and local government wasn't supporting. So it was like we kept trying to break through, but it was just like the structures weren't quite right. And I was complaining to Lillian, who'd heard a lot of it by this point in time, and she just goes, Chloe, like, if you're going to complain about it, just do something about it. So I went home and I literally Googled how to become Auckland's mayor. And I found out that for someone like me, I was 22 at the time, there were 3 barriers. So you had to be over the age of 18. I was like, sweet, 22. You had to be, pay $200 for administrative fees, so I could do that. And you had to have 2 people to nominate you, which I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with local body elections, but there are some interesting people. So I think that's like the sanity bar, like 2 people in Auckland will vote for you. So yeah,
Oh,
no idea what we were doing. We had no idea what we were doing, but I got my mates together, Tom and Casey, and I was just like, hey, I've learned that voter turnout in Auckland is 34.7%. That is like 300,000 people making decisions for 1.5 million. That's cooked. People need to understand that if they complain about stuff like busways and roadworks and, you know, licensing for bars and cafes, that stuff can change. That stuff can change if they get involved. One of the things that pisses me off the most about politics and political conversation is people go, oh, all politicians are the same, all politics is awful, I'm just going to disengage from it. The problem is when you disengage from politics, you allow the bad guys to continue getting away with that stuff because they rely on accountability in order to change. So basically we just ran a campaign with no idea what the hell would happen, ended up coming in 3rd place with just less than 30,000 votes, put together a policy package that I was really proud of. I started with the kind of premise, you know, no politician has a monopoly on the right way to do things, but also no politician knows everything. And any politician, regardless of their age, who stands in front of you and tells you that they know everything is either lying to themselves or completely lacking self-awareness. And I'm not sure which is worse. So a representative is literally about representing, eh? After that, yeah, just was like, okay, I will see where this goes. I don't want to be in politics for a very long time, but I want to make a change. So I think the perversity that occurs, you know, particularly in the larger parties that I've seen up close, is folks go in with this kind of theory of change that they are going to change things. And then they realize that being part of this big mass means that they have to sit down, shut up, and not say anything until they can climb the ranks. the problem there is that you end up sitting down and shutting up for 10 years, by which point in time, when you've finally reached the top, you have no idea what you think or feel or believe anymore because you've been so indoctrinated in that way of doing things. So my game plan is not to sit down, not to shut up, and basically just to hopefully prompt some ideas and conversation. And, you know, here for a good time, not necessarily a long time, here to shake some stuff up.
Good for you, man. That's
I like the way that, I mean, obviously for you, like you've used skills that you've got, but you've obviously been one of those ones who, when I've been listening to you there, it's like you go, oh, there's something, you know, someone should do something about that. Okay, I can be the someone, right? Is that there? And I mean, Mark and I, we've got daughters. Like, I've got one. She's in the, you know, school council. She set that up for her school, and you know, and that sort of deal. And went around and had to do the proposal to the headmaster with the PowerPoint presentation and stuff. And it's been cool hearing her doing Zoom meetings with her mates in the student council. You know, like, how can we let the other Hobsonville Point kids know that, you know, that we're all on board with them, and, you know, so they're doing messages and stuff. And it's nice to kind of get there with it. And one of the cool things about you that I've noticed about you is that, like, I've thought to myself, she's a young woman trying to do this. So normally I think women have to try 2.5 times as hard to get half the recognition, but you've got age as well. So that drops it even further, right? So you will get all these old people throwing reckons at you. Yeah, but blah, blah, blah with things.
Oh mate, you should see my emails.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm thinking. Like to do that, the resilience though, because like I have a look at anyone on either side of the house that tweets something and boom, they get swamped on either side.
Yeah.
The resilience to go to work every day, not just that, but when you're in that chamber, I've seen you guys talking sometimes, and I just think, hey, shut up, someone's talking. You know, like just the resilience of life. Of being you, because you don't, I mean, you still look like an optimistic person who wants to get stuff done. It hasn't worn you down, but it's got, does it wear a bit? And if not, how do you stop it?
Oh, it massively wears. I mean, just real free and frank, like I have clinical depression. So I actually was part of bringing together the cross-party group on mental health and addiction in Parliament. Which was a really important starting point, because I think that oftentimes I find it really gross when mental health is used as a football politically, because we're actually talking about people's lives, livelihoods, and survival. But, you know, for me, and this maybe sounds way depressing, but I'll get to the end point of it. I take quite a philosophical approach, and that could be because I've got a freaking BA in it. But in terms of mental health and kind of resilience and stuff, right? I remember studying philosophy of religion back when I was at uni, and I grew up with my grandma taking me to church and stuff, but I'm agnostic. And when I was studying religions of the world, one of the things that struck me about Buddhism was the starting points that life is suffering. Now that sounds really depressing, but when you start to unpack it, you recognize that regardless of whatever you do, stuff's going to be hard sometimes. And that kind of difficulty, struggle, and turmoil is really important because it gives you a counterweight to when things are good. But recognizing that the premise is whatever you do, stuff's going to be hard. I then take the approach that, well, you can do the thing that you end up being complacent about, you know, working 9 to 5, hating your job, hating your life, and it's going to be hard. Or you can do the thing which absolutely sets your heart on fire, and it is real freaking hard. Like, I end up speaking nowadays at all of these kind of events about, which I call BS on whenever I do them, the how to be successful kind of things. And you know, there's all of this rhetoric around, if you find the thing that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. It's rubbish. If you find the thing that you love, you will never work harder, because it probably doesn't exist. It probably doesn't pay very well. You've got to build it from the ground up, right? But that is the thing that will help you find your purpose, your identity, your sense of belonging, your people, your community. And that's where, for me, it comes back to, you know, resilience isn't necessarily an individual commodity. You can't buy it off the shelf. Resilience is a community. And I have this experience of, I think it was 2014 or 15, when I got acute appendicitis, and I worked myself into the ground to the point that I didn't recognize that it was like almost leaking out into me. Anyway, I ended up having 2 emergency surgeries. I was in hospital for 7 days, couldn't eat for 5 days. It was gnarly. And in that point in time, I was managing 3 small businesses, finishing my law degree, and still working at B. And I remember freaking out about my emails and going, holy moly, like I am going to lose all this business, all these clients, everything's going to fall apart. What about, you know, contractors and all this other stuff? And then I got out of hospital and I got back onto my emails, and I realized nobody cared. Nobody had really realized. And that was another big lesson for me, right? Is we often go around unintentionally centering ourselves in the middle of the universe and recognizing that sometimes you can just sink back and you don't have to cop all of that flag. You can just switch off your phone for like a few hours. That is a really important realization, because if you aren't sustainable, like the mahi is not going to be a sustainable way. So it's a balance of things, but to be honest, in terms of the practicality of dealing particularly with the flood of people in their rickons about, you know, how they could do my job better or whatever, I invite them. I'm like, yeah, come at me, bro. Like, please tell me your ideas. I would love to debate you. But I also try and filter stuff through, because I think that when you're in the position of a representative, often when people are hitting you up, you are their last port of call. So they've probably tried a lot of different services. People have had dramas with MSD or with MB or with the IRD or whatever institution. So they understandably are really frustrated and upset. So I try and take a lens of empathy to that and just go, hey, look, I can deal with the ad hominem attacks if there's a granule of truth in that. If there's a granule of something that is substantive, I'll engage in that and I'll give you respect. And the fascinating thing that happens when you engage with people in a respectful manner, even if they've come at you in the most hostile way, is that 99% of the time people will change their tone, or they'll stop engaging if they're a troll. So that's my usual way of dealing with things. My old man taught me, you know, and it's funny because I grew up in a household with my old man, and he was a Tory, so he's now a Green voter. But it was funny because he kind of had this real we would banter a lot about politics growing up, but I didn't quite realize it was politics because I'm the first person in my family to go to uni. And Dad said a lot of things which I've kind of later learned actually quite deeply philosophical. But my old man always said different people see different things differently. And, you know, went to uni, found out a dude called Socrates came up with that thousands of years ago. But the gist of it is, yeah, I know. Much more fantastic beard as well. And my, the way that my dad just kind of helped me to recognize as a kid, but particularly as I've moved into adulthood, that you don't have a monopoly on truth. You need to recognize that people have different perspectives, different backgrounds, different experiences of the world. And that doesn't make their way of seeing things less valid. It just means that if you want to understand them, you have to step into their shoes and see it from their perspective. And that's the thing I think around how polarized our political debate has gotten recently, that it's just not constructive. We're yelling past each other and we're never going to build anything if we're focused on doing that. So I'm interested in bringing people together and collaborating and actually getting shit done, you know.
Can I just ask one little question on that, just to further on that? Both sides of the house, you stand up, you argue, there's things like that. Do you guys actually dislike each other? Does it get to the point where you've argued too many times? It's like, actually, is it like that, or is it just, you know?
Yeah, it's a funny one, eh? So the House in Parliament, and it's funny because I reflected on this when I first came in, and one of the first things that you have to do when you're elected to Parliament is do what's called a maiden speech. It's real archaic. And I spoke in that about how, like, the chamber, so that's what's behind you, is theatre. Like, all of that is people trying to get clips for their social media. It's people getting their words on Hansard for the historical record, which has some importance. But all of that argy-bargy is theatre. It's not reality. Everything is pre-decided before people go in there. Sometimes there are still negotiations happening on the floor. So it's funny, if you watch Parliament TV, sometimes you'll see people like me. I'm what's called the musterer or the whip for the Greens. So we negotiate across the House sometimes if stuff's still happening live. But usually all of the negotiations have happened. So everybody knows how they're going to vote. Everybody knows the gist of what they're going to say. The chamber is just the place to bring that alive and to offer some theatre to it. But the other thing that's important to recognize about the chamber is that we right now, you know, if you were going to design a system that was capable of solving the biggest challenges of our time, climate change, inequality, you know, refugee numbers being way big, wars raging seemingly eternally overseas, all of those things, you would not design Parliament, okay? Like, you would design something entirely different. The irony of that space is that actually it's modelled on what's called Westminster Parliament from the UK, because we're obviously colonised, and that means that chamber, the very model of it, is literally that the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition seats are literally 2 swords length apart. That is the measurement. So the adversarial model is based on people basically having a fight and then somehow coming to some great conclusion. But the problem when you have a system that requires people to have a fight to get to a conclusion is that there's a whole lot of bad and ill will that gets caught up in that, and it doesn't offer you the opportunity to actually come to a constructive solution where you can say, hey, maybe there are some good ideas on the other side. So I think that kind of culture of Parliament is not conducive to great outcomes. So that's why I'm a big kind of nerd for Supreme Codified Constitution, but that's a whole nother yarn.
Oh, you're starting to make up words now.
Mark,
Hey,
you can't fight with the Greens. They've got that chick, she's the Muay Thai fighter.
that's what I was saying. There's
yeah,
some
bro,
confidence
come
there
at
for you.
me. Yeah, I'm 5'6.5".
Yeah, so was Amanda Nunez, and have a look at that.
Yeah, no, Chloe, this has been an amazing chat, and I thought it would be. I literally, there's a couple of things I've taken on board that A, I can help with the change in terms of my vote matters. B, I need to not be so, isolate myself so much from politics, because I feel like there is nothing there that I can't even understand half the words they're using. I should be involved in it, because if I'm not, I can't help in changing things. I'll just be one of these old people who complain. And see, just so you are aware and it's been an amazing chat, and I've learned so much from having you on, and I hope everyone else who is watching has had that too. So you're doing the Lord's work in a way that someone like me, who, I mean, we don't know each other at all, but I feel like you are doing what I would be doing if I had if I were you, kind of thing. So that, I feel like I'm represented in a way with you being this, and that will never change. So well done to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, yo, thanks, guys. I really appreciate that. And yeah, shout out for having me on here. I really appreciate it. We'll catch you again later.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you, Chloe.
See ya.